From the Folger Shakespeare Library, this is Shakespeare Unlimited. I'm Farah Kareem Cooper, the Folger director. Here at the Folger, we naturally spend a lot of time talking about Shakespeare and his contemporaries on the English stage. But in their day, Europe's literary hotspot wasn't London, it was Madrid. Spain's golden age overflowed with literature, novels, plays, and poetry that greatly influenced English writers. A theatrical form called the comedia nueva dominated the Spanish stage. Playwrights like Tirso de Molina, Pedro Calderón de la Barca, and Lope de Vega used the form to satirize contemporary Spanish society. But comedias weren't just comedies. There were histories, tragedies, and tragicomedies in comedia as well. Taken together, there's a vast body of plays from Golden Age Spain and its colonies. Hundreds of plays survive from de Vega alone, and he claimed to have written hundreds more. Barbara Fuchs teaches English, Spanish, and Portuguese literature at the University of California, Los Angeles. She leads a workshop translating comedias into English, many for the first time. Fuchs also directs an initiative called Diversifying the Classics, which brings plays in Spanish from both sides of the Atlantic to new audiences. Her adaptation of Lope de Vega's Fuente Ovejuna will be presented as part of the Folger's Reading Room Festival later this month. Here's Barbara Fuchs in conversation with Barbara Bogave.
I thought we'd start with your play premiering in our Reading Room Festival. Lope de Vega's play is based on a real event in the 15th century. Why don't you tell us about that?
So Lope uses this historical incident of a town rising up against an abusive overlord, essentially to warn his own society about the dangers of rulers who let other figures take on too much power. I was teaching this play actually in January 2025, and it was almost uncanny. And so he is constantly working between that earlier time and his own time. Along the way, he writes this extraordinary story of really the power of solidarity. And he gives a lot of agency to one of the young women in the town, Laurencia, the incredible protagonist of his play, who is the one who will really ultimately persuade the town to resist. And the original play is very carefully bounded by the authority of the monarchs. They have to come to the town and interrogate the townspeople, try to find out what happened, and try to assign punishment. The town sticks together and will only respond, Fuente Ovejuna lo hizo, Fuente Ovejuna did it. And the kings eventually have to recognize that they can't assign individual punishment, and they instead bring the town directly under their control, so it can never have the same kind of abusive overlord. In the 20th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, the play becomes fascinating to leftists in Russia. And that's when it really becomes a canonical play, because those readers recognize the force of this story as one about political solidarity.
Obviously, Lope de Vega's classic about standing up to tyranny resonates with our current political moment. But I still have to ask, why did you want to adapt this particular play for a young audience now?
Well, the project began a few years ago, and then the political moment sort of caught up to it, you might say. We've been very interested in making versions of the Hispanic classics available for kids for some time now. And this project actually began with an idea to produce storybooks for kids. We are publishing those over the course of this year. They're coming out from a Mexican university press, beautiful illustrated books for kids with very short plays after the story for kids to put on at school or at home.
Oh, that sounds so fun. I just have to say, that sounds so fun and makes me think of Lamb's Tales of Shakespeare.
Exactly. The Spanish plays didn't get a lamb, so we are trying to fill that gap. And, you know, I sort of set it up as a challenge for myself. I thought, if I can adapt Fuenteovejuna for kids, I can adapt anything, because it's a very adult play. And then I was really
That's
surprised.
Really true. I mean, there's a lot of politics in here.
Sex and violence, you name it.
And, yeah, all of it.
But then I was very pleasantly surprised to find that after you make one basic move, which is to turn from the comendador's sexual inappropriateness to think about, greed, creating a character who thinks everything is for himself, the moral storyline of the play is so clear that it actually works beautifully for kids, right? Kids have experiences with bullying, with the importance of standing up for yourself. And so it works really well in those contexts.
Wow. So you had to find that through line. Yep. And that was so clear to children. I'm going to roll back, too, just to give us some context. Lope de Vega, for listeners not familiar with the playwright, why is he considered one of Spain's greatest dramatists? Really pretty big question, right?
Yes. So he might have trouble with that one of, in that he considers his own status undisputed. So Lope essentially more or less invents the new form of playwriting in the 1590s that has a lot in common with the innovations that are occurring in England at the same time. He is very ready to shed all of the classical forms that don't work for him or for audiences, and above all wants to emphasize what audiences will love. So for Lope, this is the guiding principle. You need to write plays that audiences will enjoy. He is so successful in his formula that he writes, we think, 800 plays, but more of them keep turning up.
I think I read somewhere something like 1,500 three-act plays.
Well,
where did that come from?
I have read everything from 400 to, the upper limit of 1,500. The truth is that he publishes many of them in collections of comedias, under his own supervision, but we really have no exact count because there are so many. And people love them. In the period, the expression "es de Lope" is like saying it's fantastic, right? So you can say it about, a guitar, right? It just means it's first rate. And he's writing at that incredible pace because there is an infinite market for his work. Buys himself a beautiful house in Madrid. He is really, one could say, the first commercially successful playwright living off of his pen. And this, of course, this is happening at exactly the same time as Shakespeare in England. But the figures are extraordinary, right?
Yes, they are. And this
plays.
is all sounding very familiar, I'm sure, to our listeners if they don't know this playwright. He was also referred to as Spain's Shakespeare over the ages. But two things. One, we're talking about comedia nueva. What are the distinguishing features of that genre?
So the older forms were, 5 acts, a lot of tragedies, a lot of very careful calques from Greek and Roman sources. Lope is working much more freely with a number of different sources, some of them from Renaissance Italy or novellas, as well as from the classical tradition, and also pares things down to 3 acts, is very interested in lively plots, usually with a subplot, comes up with the figure of the gracioso, the comic sidekick, as a figure that is able to comment on the action, that often takes on a kind of breaking the fourth wall role. He's very interested in the possibilities of cross-dressing, which, of course, all the dramatists of this period take from the epic and romance tradition, but on stage, makes for incredible excitement. His plays reflect a society undergoing tremendous changes and in which perhaps the most important plot is the plot of self-creation, right? What you make of yourself through your presentation in a newly urban society. This is the period in which Madrid explodes into a capital city. And so it's a city where if you come from your small town in pursuit of the lover who's abandoned you, as is the plot of Don Gil of the Green Breeches, you might suddenly be anonymous. And the possibilities there are tremendous in terms of self-creation.
So many similarities with Shakespeare. Yes. And in part, it's the historical moment, but also the early modern period. But they had a very different life story, right? He was in and out of the military and considered the priesthood. Very tempestuous life.
Yes,
he took
actually
vows,
took orders.
Yeah.
He had very tempestuous affairs with many actresses, especially. He was exiled to Valencia for several years because of one affair that went particularly poorly. Served as a secretary for a duke for several years, and the story goes that he wrote the duke's love letters. So yes, it's an extraordinary biography.
Well, he's a contemporary of Shakespeare, so do we know if Shakespeare knew his work and what kind of cultural exchange was going on between England and Spain in the early modern period?
So what I think surprises modern readers or modern audiences is that in the period, the exchange is really going primarily one way, and that is that the English are looking to Spain. Madrid is the imperial capital. There's a tremendous degree of literary invention happening in the second half of the 16th century in Madrid. And the English playwrights are turning primarily, I would say, to prose texts rather than plays themselves, because the prose texts can travel, can make their way back to England as books. So everything from the purported Cardenio, based on an episode in Cervantes' Don Quixote, to much of the work of Fletcher, Massenger. We have abundant evidence of the English playwrights and basically English literary culture more generally taking from Spain, and almost nothing in the other direction in this period. Things would be very different later, of course.
And just to get a fix, pulling back on the big picture, we talk a lot here about the theater during Shakespeare's time and what it was like to attend a play, as they said, listen to a play at the Globe. But what was it like in Spain in that period? Was theater as popular as it was in England? And did people of all classes go and mix at the theater?
It was extraordinarily popular. I say that in terms of popularity, it was like the Netflix of its day, but of course you enjoyed it with other people. So very, very similar. They also said oír una comedia, to listen to a play. And the theaters were these vibrant spaces that brought together people of all classes. In urban spaces, there were theaters in Manila, in Seville, in Lima, in Mexico, all over the Spanish Empire. They had begun as fairly informal spaces, patios between buildings. They're called corrales de comedia, which is the same word that we use for corral, and then became more elaborate with time and gradually added balconies and other seating areas where people were separated by class and sometimes by gender. Very similar sense that on the ground you had the common people, but that nobles were also attending. And very interestingly, often attending with their retinues, so all the servants of their household. So that the theater, again, much like in England, becomes a place where you figure out how different classes present themselves on stage and what it looks like to be a noble, to be a lady.
But one big difference, of course, and you mentioned it already, that a woman stars in this play that you've adapted for the Reading Room Festival. Women performed on stage in Spain.
Oh, my
at this
goodness,
time.
and what a difference it makes.
Right.
So after much hand-wringing, they do decide to allow actresses on stage. This is not an easy decision, but eventually they come to this. The playwrights know that these extraordinary actresses are available and they write roles for them. They are paid more than the male actors. I always say Hollywood could learn a thing or two. They are the divas of their time. And that makes a difference in terms of the kinds of plays we get and the roles that they imagine for these extraordinary actresses. There are also women who run theater companies and serve as producers. There are women playwrights, which is extraordinary.
Well, that's true. And this adaptation we have been talking about for our festival is just one example of this larger project that you direct at UCLA to bring Spanish classic theater to global audiences. And another production that came out of your translation initiative there is Valor, Agravio y Mujer. And that is by the 17th century writer Ana Caro Mallén de Soto. And please excuse my pronunciation, but she sounds fascinating. Who was she?
Ana Caro is an extraordinary figure. We assume that she was probably a Morisca, part of a repressed a minority of people who were descended from Muslims in Spain, forcibly converted, marginalized over the 16th century, many of them enslaved after an uprising in the 1570s. We know this because we know she was born enslaved and then adopted by an officer of the law in Granada who may well have been her father. We have just a couple of documents around her birth. And then we jump to contracts from the city of Seville for her public entertainments, for religious festivals. And she also wrote commercial plays that were presented in the 1640s. We unfortunately only have 2 of her plays, not hundreds, as for some of the male playwrights, but they are fascinating plays. So Valor, which we translated as The Courage to Right a Woman's Wrongs, is basically a rewrite of the Don Juan story that imagines one of the many women wronged by Don Juan deciding to take matters into her own hands, dress as a man, follow him to Brussels, and essentially tangle him in so many of her webs that he is forced to marry her, in which she succeeds.
I made up my mind and bravely crossed the sea to accomplish my purpose or to die in the attempt. By the heavens above, I will be a new Amazon, a courageous Camilla, and revenge myself against this treacherous liar.
Listen to you, by God! I do believe your new attire has given you a new spirit.
I am who I am. The wrongs done to me changed me.
She also spends much of the play unsure of whether she would rather kill him or force him to marry her. So
this is a revenge play.
It's extraordinary.
Except it ends in marriage.
It's a little less bloody than the Jacobean revenge plays, but yes, sure, you could say it is a revenge
Depends
comedy.
Depends what you think of marriage.
Yes. Yes.
So a lot of cross-dressing, gender bending, and trickery.
Absolutely. The play is full of the sort of frisson of what happens when this character dresses as a man, presents as a man, makes a fine young gentleman. So the titillation in the play around the attraction of this figure for everyone else on stage. Lope was not wrong when he talked about the appeal of the cross-dressing plots, right? They are one of these very conventional forms that at the same time allow us to envision all kinds of possibilities around the construction of gender.
Well, she had such a high profile. You odds are she wrote so many more plays than just the 2 we know of.
Yes, it's unfortunate that only 2 plays have come down to us, but she is praised by other writers. We have little tidbits of references to her here and there, but unfortunately only these 2 plays, Valor era mi mujer, and the other one, El Conde Partinuples, which is a sort of fairy tale story, also featuring relationships between women and a great deal of female agency.
I'm thinking back to your adaptation for your young audiences, in which you use the main character of Mingo the storyteller in the Lope de Vega play in an interesting way to encourage participation and improv. Tell us more about that.
In the original, Mingo is just one of the townspeople. He is singled out at certain points. People are more worried that he will be the one to break when interrogated. But otherwise, he's not one of the main characters. And he seemed like an interesting figure to turn to as a way to connect with the audience. The process of trying to adapt for children always is a little bit about trying to figure out what they can follow, how much material they can take in, and the warmth of a storyteller who engages them seemed to me really important. It seems to me that the liveness of theater is made patent to kids when someone speaks to them from the stage. I think that it leads to a moment of incredible delight. And so there seemed to be an opportunity here to bring them in through this direct address from Mingo, who might, refer to the specific conditions of the production here in this town, talking about the town of Fuentejuna, the town where we are presenting the play, etc. So that was some of the thinking behind that.
And you have audience participation from the moment go with Mingo. He picks some kids to play sheep. Do you throw a sheepskin on them?
That is the hope. I mean, we have never actually done this version, and so I'm very much looking forward to the Folger reading room experience to see how it will work with kids. But yes, that is the hope, that goes smoothly, that we don't have a stampede of child sheep, and that we can make it work. Yes.
I'd like to see that. And I understand you also composed music for this reading. Was there often music in these comedia nueva plays?
So the comedia was a whole afternoon of fun. So there would definitely have been music. There were short pieces before the play. There were short pieces between each act. All of these really would have involved music. We are very fortunate that as part of our collective, we have an amazing musician and composer, Galo Ahmed Lopez, and he had just very spontaneously composed some music when we did the short play form at our workshops. So I turned to him when the Folger announced that it would do the reading and said, Galo, can we do a little bit more? Can we compose some more music for the reading? And of course, he came back with, 6 or 7 different pieces of music that he had composed to accompany this very short play. So we have an embarrassment of riches, and I'm looking forward to seeing what our director, Kelsey Mesa, will do with it.
So brave in battle, so quick to fight. Let no one doubt that what you do is right. Oh, welcome, welcome, oh, comendador. Truly, truly, you are el mejor. Welcome, welcome, oh, comendador. Truly, truly, you are el mejor.
And that's just a bit of the music composed by Galo Lopez for the production of Fuente Ovejuna. So your adaptation of this play and many of the plays is bilingual. So what does that mean?
So when we translate the plays, the originals, we translate every line into English, but we often hope that directors will then bring back some of the Spanish or be interested in including Spanish, depending on the audiences that they are imagining the play will serve. In the case of the children's adaptations, we are imagining these as a project that we want to do in Spanish and in English. As I mentioned, the storybooks are coming out in Spanish first. And in the adaptation that is being presented at the Folger, I did want to have a little bit of the flavor of the Spanish to remind audiences of the origins of this text, to make audiences who might gravitate to it because they have some connection to Latino cultures to feel welcome at this play. I think it's interesting to be playful with the Spanish, to assume that audiences can follow. There have been arguments for 30 years now that Spanish is not actually a foreign language in the United States. So it's in that spirit, I think, really, of making Spanish, and of course, in the play, but there are bits and pieces of Spanish in it.
And all of this really begs another question, which is, why are Spanish playwrights so underrepresented in curricula, literature curricula, and in theater companies? I mean, theater companies stage Ibsen and Molière and Chekhov and Brecht and Shakespeare, obviously.
How long do we have, Barbara?
Here's your platform. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is a long and complicated story, and it has everything to do with stereotypes about Spain and long histories of the relation between England and Spain. I think it's perhaps most productive to focus on all the reasons that companies and theater makers should know this work now. And really, that's what we've been up to for the past 12 years. We think it's really important, both in terms of recognizing the place of Spanish and Spanish culture within the US and the English-speaking world more broadly. And we think it's very important in terms of rounding out that theatrical tradition, that sense of the classics. Our project is called Diversifying the Classics because we think that it's very important to think about diversity in terms of what is being presented in addition to who is doing the presenting. So when we started the project, we were coming out of a very salutary period in which people had been rethinking their relationship to the classics and who got to act in these plays, who got to direct these plays. So we had already come a great distance in terms of the diversity of the people presenting the classics. But our sense was that there was a lot more work to be done in terms of thinking about the diversity of what was being presented. And that bringing this incredibly rich body of work, I mean, there are 10,000 extant plays from the Hispanic classical tradition, that bringing this work to the table was absolutely critical.
I do want to ask you whether the theater world's glorification of and focus on Shakespeare makes it more difficult for these pieces from Spanish classical theater to get staged.
Yes. And also, I think that Shakespeare has made room, right? So the fact that we think that seasons need a classical play is due to Shakespeare. I have nothing but admiration for Shakespeare. I sometimes think that companies might be very excited to know that if they go beyond England, there are extraordinary plays written by women in Shakespeare's time, that there are plays that center women in a way that is less frequent in the English tradition. So for companies that have put on, umpteen Hamlets and one too many Romeo and Juliets, here are some interesting versions you might want to think of instead. Here are some other ways of looking at the world from that period that you might find and that your audiences might find absolutely compelling.
Well, what reaction do you get from your students when they first encounter these plays? Do they say something similar, like, why haven't I heard of this guy before, Lope de Vega?
So, I mean, those are some of the most amazing moments when, we will have a performance or a reading and some college student will come up to us and say, why did I never encounter this in years of, high school and college? Why am I first encountering this now? And that's extraordinary. What's also incredibly satisfying is when the students say, this was written in the 17th century. We always say that part of our mission is to convey that the past is not reactionary just because it is past. And
so they're shocked by the sex and the cross-dressing, or what?
The idea that people in earlier periods also questioned things that they might be questioning today, that these things were not always settled. And these plays are extraordinary for showing us characters who figure out how to make their way through the rules of their time. And I think students often tend to think that societies of the past, everyone followed those rules. And of course, that's not the case.
Well, we've been talking so much about classical theater, but you also work with contemporary playwrights.
Yes. So when we started this project, we were very clear that starting from such dearth, that it was really important to think about all the ways in which we could engage audiences and theater makers. And so early on, we launched a project to engage contemporary playwrights with this corpus. It's an adaptation project called Golden Tongues, in which we pair LA playwrights with a comedia text. They select it, we guide them in that selection. And then they produce a brand new play based on that comedia source text. And so we are now, I think, up to 17 or 18 plays. We published a number of them in an anthology called Golden Tongues just last year. We also then present these adaptations at the festival that we run every other year in Los Angeles called La Escena, which is a festival of Hispanic classical theater. We present plays in the original. We bring companies from Mexico, Spain, and elsewhere. We present some plays in translation and also these adaptations, these brand new plays. We've also expanded to doing similar work with playwrights in Mexico and in Argentina. We think that the traditions remain vibrant when they are transformed. And so we think this is a really important part of the project, is to have that constant recreation, transformation at the hand of writers today.
Well, I can't wait to see what comes out of your project and to hear more comedia nueva from your translations and your adaptations. And thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Barbara.
That was Barbara Fuchs, interviewed by Barbara Bogave. Fuchs's adaptation of Lope de Vega's play Fuente Ovejuna will premiere on January 24th as part of the Folger's Reading Room Festival. For tickets and more information, visit folger.edu/readingroom. This episode was produced by Matt Frasica. Garland Scott is the executive producer. It was edited by Gail Kern-Pastor. We had technical help from Christoph Zajac-Denik in Santa Monica and Voice Tracks West in Studio City, California. Our web producer is Paula Garcia Acuna. Leonor Fernandez edits our transcripts. Final mixing services provided by Clean Cuts at 3Cs Inc. If you're a fan of Shakespeare Unlimited, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Shakespeare Unlimited comes to you from the Folger Shakespeare Library. Home to the world's largest Shakespeare collection, the Folger is dedicated to advancing knowledge and the arts. If you're in Washington, D.C., come visit the Folger on Capitol Hill. Come face to face with a Shakespeare First Folio in our exhibition halls, or take in a play in our theater, or enjoy our Quill and Crumb Cafe. We'd love to see you. For more information, visit our website, folger.edu. Until next time, thanks for listening.